Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Kolonas and Mike LaRosa.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. This is your weekly recap for week 23 of 2025. I am Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined by Mike LaRosa as my co-host. Mike, how are you, and what have we got lined up for this week?
Hey, Hector, doing great. Glad to be back here for another week of recaps. I believe this week's newsletter was proudly sponsored by Syncaroo. So thank you so much, Hector, for sponsoring the podcast. For all of you interested in more info, there's a really great write-up in the newsletter about that. So big shout out to our sponsor for this week. For this week, we're tackling a couple hot topics. The disintermediation conversation continues. This week, it touches upon virtual office. So we'll be chatting a little bit about that. The big item of the week that I have a couple hot takes on is coworking dead, or the coworking must rise from the dead conversation, aka is coworking a zombie? We'll tackle into that. We're also chatting about a couple cool different concepts, differentiation of specialties in the marketplace, whether it be adding coworking for podcasting or coworking for fashion design. We're also going to be talking about updates to membership options that one operator rolled out, which is it something that we'll see in the future? Will others take that up? And last but not least, a hot button topic that hit my radar this week was SEO for AI.
Fantastic. It's a really action-packed newsletter this week again. If you are listening in or you're watching this and you have no idea what we're talking about, head over to thisweekincoworking.com. You'll see our weekly newsletters there and a bunch of other fantastic content that we put out as well. But we are talking about the newsletter for week 23. So if you're listening along and you want to get a little bit more information and get the context around the conversation, follow along under week 23 on thisweekincoworking.com. So first topic, I was at an event on a panel yesterday. A whole bunch of people who read the newsletter came up to me and they're like, is this link going to be in your newsletter? In our submission link, we had this link submitted a few different times. A lot of people are asking what my take or our take is on Brad Hargreaves' post around whether co-working needs to rise from the dead. I'm going to take a second here because in the story, in the link, he shares his experience as someone who understands commercial real estate, as someone who knows a lot of people in co-working, his frustration or pain or inability due to technology or whatnot to find 3 affordable desks to rent in Manhattan, and how because of that and what he found, he feels that WeWork has left a gaping hole in the community side of co-working, in the affordable, community-focused, supportive side of co-working, to which I was immediately triggered. And I was like, what? A, where did you search? B, who did you ask? C, did you look at any of the aggregators? Did you look at which aggregators? What did you search for? What was your criteria? There are so many operators between here in Jersey City and Brooklyn on the other side of Manhattan that automatically match the 3 criteria that he put out. And so I was like, A, did you look hard enough, or the ways that other operators or other companies are looking for space? And 2, if he couldn't find your space, what does that mean for you? Is that a threat or an opportunity for you to be like, I've got a space that matches your criteria in Manhattan. How come you didn't find me? Is it because the word of mouth wasn't strong enough? Is our SEO isn't good enough? We're going to talk about AEO in a little bit. So that's the thoughts that I had. But I want to head it over to you, Mike. What did you take away from this piece?
I was really surprised that this type of piece would come from Brad, because I think that this is 100% clickbait. Now, I'm not taking away his experience, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but the experience that he writes about not having a great time interacting with someone at WeWork, trying to give them a tour, reminded me very much of my experience at his former company, Common. I lived in Chicago. I attempted to tour Common no less than 3 times. Couldn't get anyone to return a message. Everything forced me to chat or to communicate in their chat bot window. And this was before AI was really on the scene. I'm talking 2016, 2017, 2018. So I was, okay, I've experienced this with one of your organizations. So it's clearly easier said than done. I think that all in all, my takeaway was this was very much clickbaity. I was frustrated with the piece because it's one of those things where it's okay, co-working has lived and died before and it shall live again. I don't know about you, but the last time I checked, Flex is booming everywhere. Like, I don't see what he sees that is co-working dead. Is he talking about specifically the lease arbitrage model? He's claiming that it might come back. I actually don't think it's going to come back. The second part of his piece talks about the benefits of OpCo PropCo, which we've advocated for many times on this. So I felt it was important for us to bring that up. Sure, it's a relatively long read, if you ask me. And I think it's name dropping. Oh, I talked to Jamie Hodari about this. There's nothing new in what came out of that little tidbit. So I'm glad that we included it. I think it's important to read these types of things so that way you are on top of the discussion at events, because obviously people are talking about it. But my big takeaway was like, this was a big fat nothing burger. It was clickbait for people to get all up in arms about something. And that if you, what we say week in and week out, apologies for my broken record, but if you are able to find the signal in the noise, this is noise. And so the signal is, maybe there's a couple elements of signal in this long piece, but the fact is that rent arbitrage is not a great model. And I'm a far bigger believer on OpCo PropCo. Maybe management agreements have their downsides as well. But I think that a lot of operators are going to start realizing that the building owners themselves are just going to start doing this. And that's the biggest takeaway from Jamie's new role at CBRE is, why are we going to partner with all these operators? Maybe we just do it ourselves. That's the way. I was not too impressed.
I always want to give creators and people who share their opinions or opine online. I try to find the signal in there, in the noise, right? And there was some takeaways that I was like, yes, co-working spaces, or flex spaces as we call them more broadly, is confusing, right? If someone, maybe we're all confused around what he means by co-working. Is it the bullpen style open desk offering, which, a lot of operators have shifted away from that. It is a lot of operators going away from putting on events or subsidizing their desks and increasing the kombucha quality or the coffee quality, or we are seeing this flight to higher quality, more corporate co-working. And so maybe that's the experience that he saw and he was looking for something else. So I do think that there is a terminology taxonomy undercurrent there. And I do think that this is something we've discussed multiple times. Maybe he just didn't find what he was looking for because of the confusion around terminology. There are WeWorks that are very focused on community. There are industriouses, there are the Marlin, but also I found it really interesting because the Marlin is a very premium brand, fantastic community, fantastic space. But earlier in the piece, it complained about there being someone charging $1,000 a desk. I'm not sure how close that is to the Marlin, but I'm pretty sure it's around there. So it was just a really interesting piece. As you said, we included it because of how many people reached out to us about it. And so we really wanted to put it out there. We want, as you said, Mike, we want people to know what folks are saying about co-working, because that is the terminology that we all live around. And so maybe the time is now for us to know, to really fix that terminology, that taxonomy, and be like, co-working is either the umbrella term or flex space is the umbrella term, and co-working fits under that. But as I've had this conversation with many executives over the last kind of year and a bit, who defines that, right? Everyone has some nuance and some horse in the race. And so who defines what the terminology is? So it's just an interesting topic. I've definitely wanted to include it for that. But we believe co-working is thriving. We see it. We see it in the stats that we're sharing. We're seeing it expand into the suburbs. We're seeing unstopped spaces booming. We're seeing people who never had access or the ability or the capability to work from co-working being given that freedom to choose where to work from. So I absolutely disagree that co-working needs to rise from the dead. I think co-working is growing in multiple different ways that people who aren't following this newsletter probably don't even realize. So I'm just going to leave that there.
Yeah, no, couldn't put it any better. It's always good to be informed. And the whole idea of dialogue is to have disagreement and discussion. And so there are valid points in here, but I also am reminded of different biases. I've got them, you've got them, Brad certainly has them. The experience that he shared is not unique. I
Mhm.
too have struggled trying to get in touch with co-working operators, trying to get prices for options and whatnot. But yet that doesn't necessarily mean that co-working is dead.
Agreed. On that note, should we move over to another hot button topic that has been in the news and in the newsletter for the last couple of weeks? If you've listened to a previous episode over the last couple of weeks or seen the previous newsletters, there's been this new term that's been popping up again and again, and that's the disintermediation of third parties in kind of the booking process. In the previous posts, we really looked at whether there needed to be brokers, and we're not going to rehash that. But Sophia Stolberg from Piloto Mail and Piloto 151 jumped into the discussion this week saying how to build a sustainable, successful, and profitable virtual office business, you have to disintermediate. You have to own the customer. You have to sell directly to them. You have to control from click to parcel the entire process. And it's just a really interesting take. Following the thread this morning, I saw Janine van der Linder from De Kamer over in Netherlands, who's a OG in not only co-working, but in virtual office services as well, agreeing with this sentiment. So, Mike, what did you think about this positioning?
Just like with the last post we talked about, I think reminding yourself of biases is really important. And so we are big fans of Sophia. I think everything that she's doing is really awesome. And at the end of the day, she's still also the owner of a virtual office company. So I think that's
Yes.
important just to put frame of reference. I think this is a great conversation and it's not comparing apples to apples. This is a little
Mm.
bit different than the disintermediation of brokers for physical space. I actually agree with her on the
Mhm.
virtual office argument because there are so many complications and additional nuances with legal
Mhm.
issues around handling of mail, privacy, client information, the legality of having different addresses. And she
Yeah.
makes a really good point about the confusion of brand. That's something that I most definitely encountered working for aggregators in my day and time where people were booking on one brand and then they're going to a different space. And then
Mhm.
how do you ensure you control that brand quality, that experience? People get confused. And a lot of people thought maybe it was a desk pass space when actual desk pass doesn't have any spaces, right?
Yes.
So I think she made some really valid arguments as an owner of a virtual office company. And so
Yes.
I think that it probably, I think diving into some more of the conversation, the dialogue on that LinkedIn post, Janine used a great term, unlearning. And I
Mhm.
think that that's something that if you're an operator, you might dive in thinking, oh, this virtual office aggregator is no different than a on-demand aggregator. And then you might get a little far down the road and realize actually, no, it's more complicated. So if we've been talking about a lot about virtual office, if you are currently not offering virtual office or you're considering how better to do so, make sure you check out this post, check out
Mhm.
the arguments that Sophia made. I most definitely agree with her on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to just play devil's advocate because we do
Yeah.
have a lot of friends who are in the aggregation of virtual office as well, right? On the one hand, if you have the ability and the team and the technology in place to handle the e-commerce side, handle the customer service side, handle the compliance side, and then still staff up for the mail, that's 4 tasks you have to hire for to do this yourself. On the flip side, if you have a space that's thriving and you're already focused on that and you want to add an additional revenue source without the first three and only manage the mail, this is why the aggregators in VO are there, right? From Anytime to iPostal One to Alliance, this is their bread and butter, and they've been doing this for a long time. So it it's very interesting to have this conversation because I have friends on both sides of this debate, and we do at the newsletter as well. So we do want to obviously just share that there is benefits to the Alliance
Oh,
aggregator side of this market, especially if you've got this is not your main part of the business. But it also goes back to the undercurrents we did on e-commerce, right? If you go over to the undercurrent section of our website, you'll see that there is this shift and this just debate around online travel agencies and
yeah.
booking direct for hotels, right? It's the same debate. I don't think it's one or the other just yet. If you have a strong brand and a great zip code and people are coming to you and you're getting referrals, you should definitely be doing e-commerce. You should be owning that transaction. But if people are already searching for your zip code on other platforms and you have competitors in the area who maybe are listed on those platforms, are you just giving that money away to competitors? Even if it's, what I think the margins, Sophia mentioned, around 60%. 60% of $1 is better than 100% of $0. And so just keep that in mind. It is an evolving debate. And in the common thread, I invited both Janine and Sophia, and we'll get some of the aggregators involved as well, to host a quick roundtable on VO and disintermediation. And it looks like that's coming together pretty quickly. So we'll pull that together and get it into your podcast feed.
Awesome. Next up, we've got some follow-up news from a past podcast guest of ours. I know Johnny from Space Made had teased about some different concepts that they were rolling out in their managed space business offering. Space Made announced this week, pretty exciting news, that they've got a new location in West London that is part of a larger development that's focused more on fashion. So Studio Y is now being opened as a specialized co-working space for fashion and beauty brands in West London's Yellow Building at the Notting Dale campus. So they're in good company. They're alongside tenants such as Stella McCartney and Phoebe Philo and Dun London. I only know one of those three names, but it does make a lot of sense from a developer standpoint to put in what is essentially a low-touch accelerator or incubator, where the concept is, okay, maybe they're not specialized programming about it other than just community programming. Maybe they're not making active investments in these types of companies, but it does make sense that you want to co-locate where other businesses are, just from a trade and doing business standpoint. And that also points us to another post that we had this week from Nomad Works, which is a great space in Manhattan that I frequent often when I'm in town. And they've partnered up with an agency to actually roll out a full service podcasting facility offering. So this isn't just like, here's a quiet room for you to record a podcast, even though those are plenty helpful. This is actually a bundled service offering where there's different tiers, where the base offering includes a technician and all the raw files of the video and the audio, and then it scales up to where you can even turn it into a membership where they will do weekly podcasts for you 4 times a month. And as someone who does podcasts, I don't know, Hector, how does this ring with you? What are your thoughts on all this?
I'm a huge fan of adding in auxiliary services that generate new revenue and create new value from existing resources. A meeting room that was sitting there underused. We've seen this kind of spike in people creating podcast studios, but if no one's there to actually tell the members how to use it, not everyone has done a podcast before, right? I remember the first episodes we did of this, like there was 3 pixels on my screen, right? It's getting slightly better, but just having a podcast studio doesn't always solve the problem or create enough value. Tying that in with, you get the video files, you get multi-angle, you get multicam, you get separated audio. Like folks who've never done a podcast, like this is probably all gibberish, but it makes the production process easier and faster, and you can reuse that content a lot better. So it totally makes sense. And going back to the Space Made thing, we're seeing this nichification, right? We're seeing spaces and amenities created for specific types of customers. And we know that, going back to Sophia, she's done this really well with her communities in Puerto Rico. And we're seeing this as a growing shift, right? Like brands creating spaces that specific types of customers or ICPs can identify with. I'm a podcaster. This is something I'm going to be doing. Well, podcasts is going to be a big part of my strategy for the next 12 months. I should probably co-locate somewhere where someone's going to take care of all the audio qualities and remove that echo and do the things that I don't want to think about, but I know I need to be more of a media presence, have more of a social presence. These are all kind of conversations that are happening. On the topic of Space Made, I just want to take a quick moment to send our thoughts and condolences to the family of Dan Silverman over at Space Made. He unfortunately passed away a couple of weeks ago. I didn't put it in the newsletter, but I know he was an avid reader and supporter of the newsletter. So I just want to send out our heartfelt condolences to them and their team for his passing. But I also want to shift over to another brand in the UK, which definitely has been in our radar for a little bit of time now. A couple of weeks ago, we reported that the team at WorkLife had an internal hackathon with the premise of trying to reimagine if they're to create memberships from scratch for today's customer, what would it look like? And they teased about that a couple of weeks ago. I love the fact that they had an internal hackathon about this. I love the fact that they had a kind of blue sky thinking approach. But this week they actually announced what those memberships look like. Mike, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about what's different about the new work-life memberships?
Yeah, it's exciting. And it's interesting to see that there's a lot of correlation to other types of memberships that we're seeing, not just in our industry, but possibly adjacent industries. So they've reimagined their unlimited membership and they've broken them down into two different tiers. So there's a single space access that's now available at a lower rate. And then they've got their all space access, which is all of their different locations, not too unfamiliar with what WeWork calls all access versus their single location. So that kind of matches what we're seeing in the industry. They've also rolled out a flex membership that I've heard requests for years where can't a team pull from day passes? So can't I buy 25 day passes, and why can't my 5 employees all draw off of that single pool? Which makes total sense. And to be honest, I think it was more so a lack of technological ability. I never met an operator that was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. I always met operators that were like, well, the software that we use assigns passes to a single user, not a user group. Although I know of one platform that doesn't have that problem, but yeah, I think it's more of a technology thing. So it'd be interesting to find out how work life, because it's one thing to have the kind of hackathon for the ideas, but then it's also then how do you implement that? So it would be interesting to hear from work life, like, did they have to figure out a workaround for their software for that to make sense? But this isn't something unusual. And honestly, not to make it all about me, but I'll have a little Scott Galloway moment. I see this happening across the board. And when I mentioned the adjacent industry, this is no different than what United just did to their United Club members. And so am I still a little bitter that my membership went up from $750 to $1,200 just so that I can bring my partner in with me? Yes, but it is reflective of what I think, I don't know what you would describe, maybe the tiering of different membership benefits. I think it's just like with airlines where, you went from coach to basic economy and premium economy. Now we're just diversifying more options. And like with the United membership, right? If I wanted to just go by myself, that's $750 a year. But now if I want to go and bring either my partner while traveling on vacation or a business partner that I'm traveling on a work trip now, that's $1,200 just for having up to 2 more people with me. So, and it just was, I was like, oh, I guess this is just where we're on the constant march to late stage capitalism. And I guess this is just part of it.
I can definitely see that angle and this whole segmentation or segregation of different types of memberships or different types of members, but also think it makes spaces more accessible. Going back to the shared pool of desk passes or day passes, we've seen so many companies, as you say, try to do this in non-technological ways. It started, we know, punch cards, right? You buy 10 and then you punch them out. And then, once you're done, you buy another punch card. And that's how they used to track it, very low tech. But then people were like, can I just leave the card here in a locker and then anyone from my team can come and use the same card? And people are like, oh, I guess you could do that. But then how do we track it in the inventory system and the Wi-Fi system, all of that? So yeah, I definitely want to dig a little bit deeper with the Work Life team into how they've made this work. We're speaking to them a couple of times in their therapy sessions that we've mentioned in the newsletter. So I'll have a word and see if they're willing to share their recipes and their structure of it on a pod maybe with This Week in Coworking readers.
Yeah, that'd be great. And speaking of technology, I don't know if in 2025 we can have a podcast episode without an AI topic. But I was really excited to see you include this in the list for this week's newsletter because, as I was sharing with you, I just recently fell down the rabbit hole myself about AEO, which is basically SEO for AI engine optimization. And obviously, co-working, flex, everything is still hockey sticking up, right? The searches are not decreasing, but more and more, and I find myself as well, I'm going to an AI tool to do my search. I'm not going directly to the Google search. And so I shared with you that there was a company that I was like, oh crap, they didn't pop up in this and they probably should have popped up in this. And I'm like, how does that work now? So we've included a really great post from our friends at Office R&D. Once again, they have great content that we're always happy to include. And it was interesting to understand the changes to how these algorithms are pulling information.
Yep.
And I think it's most definitely, my takeaway was you still have to be very clear and thoughtful with a strategy and with tactics. You can't give up. You have to keep on plugging away, but it's not that traditional like link back, whatever they
Backlink,
call
yeah.
it, like backlinking and all that type of stuff where you were trying to game the SEO to increase authority. You're the more technical out of this duo. So what's your takeaway? What are things that co-working operators should know so that way they can ensure that they come up when someone says, hey, ChatGPT, I'm looking for co-working in New York?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because in order to really understand it, we have to go a bit back and just figure out how SEO works, right? And I've definitely included this topic because as Syncaroo, we sponsor this newsletter. We talked about how we do tech therapy, or what we call problem-solving calls, but our customers call tech therapy for operators across the brand. And this topic has kept coming up, right? It's definitely something that people are thinking about. They're not being found in the AI search results. So if we look back a little bit at how SEO works, Google sends out a thing called a Google bot. It runs and checks the different websites. It looks for what's on the page. It then looks for what linked to that page. And that's how you get what we call page authority, right? The more credible sites who have good links to them, who then link to you, that increases your page authority. And that kind of affects what search results come up on the front page of Google. AI has taken a completely different approach. They are looking for context within the page and context within the links, as opposed to, oh, you're on a link farm website or a directory that links to all the co-working spaces in New York, valueless information. But if all the ratings or the social graph is saying whenever someone mentions co-working in New Jersey or New York, and you're coming up in that, even if it's not linked to you, it's able to build those neural links essentially that is bringing together content. And that's why when you go to a search result, I'm not sure if you're listening and if you've ever used something like Perplexity or ChatGPT to do like a Google search to do a web search, you'll see that it doesn't just bring you one result from one page, right? It brings you 3 or 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, and even Google does this now. And each of those paragraphs are from different sources. So it's stitching together a story. Now, this is very valuable to think about how you play into that strategy. How do you create a social graph? How do you start crafting this neural network of context? But on the other side, you have to remember this is going to hit your web traffic, right? We're seeing HubSpot, Salesforce, all these large companies who built this huge inbound funnel of content. All of their search traffic fell off a cliff because if the AI engine is giving them the context there, and it's just a tiny little like link icon that takes you to the website, the click-throughs are going to drop, right? So you have to really think about that as part of your strategy. How do you make sure or try and build a strategy around the information that is there is so valuable that they want to learn more to click to your website, right? And so that's the one thing. The other thing is most people who are doing AI searches right now are looking for information. They're not looking to make an action. I'm fairly confident in saying that. However, and this goes back to our deep dive on AI agents, I see a future where we will not interact with search engines in a chat mechanism. There will be a search mechanism in the background. Our personal assistant AI will know that I have a talk at 5 p.m. I've got a call at 4 p.m. and there's a co-working space with a meeting room downstairs from where I'm giving the panel. Why do I need to think about that when it can check the website, check the prices, it knows what I'm willing to spend, book the meeting room, and then just update my calendar so that I know which meeting room I'm going into? And that is where you really have to think about, are you coming up in the search results? Or have you got an MCP strategy? Have you got a mechanism to handle payments? Have you thought about what it looks like to have an AI bot pay you? Who's responsible for that? If they get it wrong, who's fault? So there is a lot more to this conversation, but I don't want to make another full deep dive into AI. I'm going to leave that there for this week, but definitely if you're interested in this, go and check out the undercurrents we did on AI agents. It's got a bit more of the fundamentals, the difference between the different mechanisms we're talking about here. And if you're looking for what does this mean for my business, the advert this week, the sponsorship this week is all about the fact that we're giving free one-on-ones to anyone who listens to this or anyone who watches this. Reach out, sit down with me for 45 minutes, ask me any question you want. I'm not here to sell you anything. My job is to just show you what it looks like to have someone you can ask the questions maybe you're too shy to ask out loud, and have someone give you unbiased, unfiltered feedback.
Yeah, no, like I said, it wouldn't be a podcast episode in 2025 without AI. There's a couple other posts this week that reference it and very much talk about how the hopeful role it takes is that it's like an assistant in the background, right? Like you said, knowing that you have to go somewhere, so it's just going to find you the space for you. And how cool is it that maybe you've got other agents that it works with, knowing that you have a Desk Pass membership or you have a membership to WeWork already. So it's not even asking you what brand, it's using that knowledge of, oh, he pays for the subscription for this company, he's going to need it here or whatnot. So very cool. Another jam-packed week of co-working and flex news. Thank you so much, Hector. It's always a blast. Anything you want to share with the listeners before we call it a day?
No, we've definitely got some exciting podcast episodes dropping in the feed, so definitely look out for that. We did a bit of a deep dive into a topic that I've never heard anyone in co-working talk about, which is dropping next week, featuring our amazing friend Janine. So definitely look out for that one. And then we've just got another Unpacking APAC episode dropping next week on Wednesday. So another jam-packed week next week. We'll be back in your podcast feed on Friday, Mike and I. Until then, have a fantastic week. Take care. Hopefully it's sunny wherever you are. And we'll see you again next week.